The transmission came through with an urgency that chilled even the most seasoned members of the USS Omen's crew. A flash of data, a crackling voice, the kind of distress signal that was rare enough to send ripples through the military command center. Yet the message that echoed across the communication room was far beyond anything they had ever anticipated. Please. Help us. We beg you. The Zskari Empire is falling. We are dying. Commander Nathaniel Holt leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of the command chair as the words sank in. The Zskari. Their name alone conjured images of terrifying war machines and unshakable empires. A species once known to treat humanity as little more than a nuisance. The thought of them asking for help was almost unthinkable. Zskari. Valen, his sharp-eyed first officer, spoke the words softly, her voice laced with disbelief. The same Zskari who thought we were inferior? The same ones who refused any peace negotiations? Holt's gaze never wavered from the screen, his mind racing through countless possibilities. The Zskari were a force of nature, ancient, technologically advanced, and relentless in their military conquests. Yet, here they were, begging. What had brought them to this point? The message continued, crackling with desperation. We cannot stop it. The blight is consuming us. We are helpless. We have no more weapons, no way to fight it. Only Deathworlders can save us now. Deathworlders. The term, reserved for the most dangerous and resilient species in the galaxy, made the hairs on Holt's neck stand up. It was clear. The Zskari weren't just asking for assistance. They were pleading for salvation from a species they had once considered beneath them. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to HFY Chronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out! Hit that subscribe button and join the fight! Holt exchanged a glance with Valen, both of them understanding the magnitude of what they were about to undertake. The Zskari were the first to encounter the blight, a virulent, biological weapon, but now it was threatening to consume everything they had built. And despite their advanced technology and weapons, they were powerless to stop it. The very species that had once seen humanity as little more than children in the galactic playground now had no choice but to turn to Earth, the Deathworlders they had once mocked. This is insane, Valen muttered, clearly disturbed by the turn of events. Why us? Why now? Holt's voice was low, steady. Because we are survivors. We don't bow to extinction. We fight, and we adapt. The Zskari. They're learning that the hard way. But Holt wasn't sure. He wasn't sure they should go. This could be a trap, a ploy to draw humanity into a war. The Zskari had many enemies, and their desperation could be part of a larger strategy. And yet, if this blight truly was what the Zskari claimed it was, and humanity could offer a solution, they would be setting an example to the galaxy of human resilience. Set course for Zskari Prime, Holt ordered. Prepare the crew for a medical mission. If this is as bad as it sounds, we may need every resource we have. The USS Omen powered up its engines, the dark expanse of space ahead illuminated only by distant stars. Holt's thoughts were heavy as they made their way toward the Zskari homeworld. What awaited them on the other side? Was this truly a mission to save a dying empire? Or was it a dangerous gambit to test humanity's resolve? Whatever happens, Holt said quietly, we're about to change the galaxy forever. The ship's engines hummed louder, the tension palpable in every corner of the vessel. And somewhere, deep within the heart of the Zskari Empire, their fate hung in the balance, desperate for an answer, and hoping that Deathworlders were the answer they never saw coming. The journey through the dark void of space felt endless. As the USS Omen cut through the cosmos, the crew could only wonder what awaited them on the other side. The ship's sensors were scanning for any signs of hostile activity, but so far, the Zskari homeworld, Zskari Prime, was eerily silent. It was as though the very planet itself had fallen under a deathly silence, a quiet before an inevitable storm. The hum of the engines was the only sound that seemed to break the stillness, its steady rhythm keeping everyone on edge. Holt stood in the command center, his arms crossed, staring at the holographic display of the Zskari system. Zskari Prime, orbited a massive, unstable star, a constant source of solar flares that gave the system an almost menacing appearance. The planet itself was a vast industrial hub, home to one of the most ruthless military civilizations the galaxy had ever known. Every inch of the planet was carved into structures of towering obsidian spires, brimming with technology that humans could only dream of. And yet, despite their advancements, the Ziskari were pleading for help. Approaching Ziskari Prime, Valen's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood at the helm, her fingers gliding over the touch interface, pulling up sensor readings and tactical data. No signs of enemy ships, no fleet movements detected. "Something's off about this," Holt muttered, his voice laced with suspicion. "Why aren't they defending themselves? Why haven't they called in reinforcements?" Valen glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "Maybe they're not capable of it anymore." Holt's expression darkened. He had heard of the Shikari's ruthlessness, how their empire had once expanded across entire sectors, crushing everything in its path. They were a brutal species, known for their military superiority and their near-obsessive desire for dominance. The idea that they were now helpless, unable to fend off an existential threat, was unsettling. He turned to the tactical officer, Lieutenant Dax. "Anything from the planet?" Dax's hands danced across the controls, pulling up more data. "Nothing unusual. I'm getting high levels of energy emissions from the surface, but it's not consistent with standard energy production. Almost like they're using more power than they can handle." "Keep an eye on that," Holt ordered. "Something doesn't add up." The USS Omen finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the massive planet looming before them. Ziskari Prime's surface was a swirling mass of storm clouds, darkened skies, and lightning crackling across jagged peaks. It was as if the very atmosphere had been scarred by years of industrial war, as if the planet itself was bearing the brunt of centuries of conquest. And yet, beneath that violent exterior, Holt could sense the vulnerability. An empire at its breaking point, on the precipice of collapse. "We're being hailed." Dax's voice crackled from the communications panel. Holt nodded, stepping forward. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Ziskari officer, a high-ranking commander based on the insignia. His armored figure loomed in the transmission, a grim expression on his face. The Ziskari were massive creatures towering over humans, with their reptilian features, their scales dark like polished obsidian. Their eyes, black as space itself, shimmered with an intensity that spoke of years of warfare and conflict. This officer, however, looked different. His posture hunched, his gaze weary. "You've come—" The officer's voice was raspy, filled with exhaustion. "We did not expect it, but we are grateful." Holt didn't respond immediately. His mind was still processing the fact that this officer, the very representative of an empire that had once looked down upon humanity, was now asking for help, asking for their intervention. The Ziskari were too proud, too self-reliant to ever openly beg for assistance unless something catastrophic was happening. "Explain the situation," Holt said, his voice cold yet steady, holding his resolve. The Ziskari officer hesitated before speaking, his eyes flickering with something that could almost be mistaken for fear. "The blight. It is a biological plague. It spreads faster than we can combat it. We thought we could contain it, but it adapts. It overpowers our immune systems, consumes our resources, our weapons, our technology. It does nothing." Holt's mind raced as the officer continued to describe the blight in horrifying detail. The disease, an engineered plague, had been unleashed by a rogue faction within the Ziskari Empire, an attempt to create the ultimate biological weapon. However, in their arrogance, the Ziskari had underestimated its potential. The blight evolved at an exponential rate, mutating and changing in ways no one had predicted. It spread from world to world, devastating Ziskari colonies and wiping out entire populations without mercy. "Why haven't you contacted the Galactic Council?" Valen asked, disbelief in her voice. "Why not reach out to your allies?" The officer's gaze faltered. "The blight. It doesn't just kill. It infects anyone nearby. Any species that comes into contact with it is doomed to suffer the same fate. We are isolated. We cannot afford to spread it further." Holt's mind spun as he processed the heat implications. If the blight was as powerful as the officer described, if it could jump from species to species, then it posed a threat to the entire galaxy. The Zitskari had underestimated it, but now humanity had been dragged into a fight they never expected. What could they do? Was it possible to stop something so deadly, so adaptable? "We are offering our help," the officer said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We have no choice. You are our only hope." Holt's heart weighed heavy with the knowledge that he was now tied to an empire that had once considered humanity expendable. A part of him felt a surge of anger at the hypocrisy of it all. These were the same beings who had once enslaved others, who had waged wars to expand their own influence. And now they were on their knees, begging for the very species they had once scorned to save them. "Prepare to send down a team," Holt said, his voice unwavering. "We'll assist you, on the condition that you share everything. We need full access to your research on the blight, your data, your resources. No secrets. Understand?" The Zitskari officer bowed his head in submission. "Yes, Commander. Whatever it takes." With that, the transmission ended, and the USS Omen set its course for the surface of Zitskari Prime. As the ship descended through the thick atmosphere, Holt's mind raced. Could humanity truly save the Zitskari, or was this mission a doomed endeavor? One thing was certain. If they couldn't stop the blight, they would be facing an unprecedented threat, one that could consume the galaxy. As the ship touched down on the desolate surface, a chill settled over the crew. The Zitskari Empire was crumbling, and humanity was now its last hope. But was that hope enough? The moment the USS Omen touched down on Zitskari Prime, an unsettling quiet enveloped the crew. The surface of the planet was a wasteland, scarred by millennia of industrial warfare and the brutal exploitation of its resources. Towering metal spires rose from the ground like jagged teeth, casting long, dark shadows across the barren landscape. The air was thick with a stifling heat, the atmosphere tinged with the acrid scent of burnt chemicals and decaying machinery. Skari Prime had once been a symbol of military might, a technological marvel at the heart of a vast empire. Now it looked like a dying world, a relic of its former glory. "Stay alert," Holt instructed, his voice sharp as he gathered his team at the airlock. "We don't know what we're walking into down there." The crew was geared up in full combat, suits, their helmets reflecting the distorted landscape outside. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. No one spoke, each person lost in their own thoughts, weighed down by the gravity of the mission ahead. They were about to face a threat that could very well wipe out not only the Zitskari, but humanity itself. If the blight was as deadly as the officer had described, they would need more than just weapons. They would need a strategy, and fast. The doors of the USS Omen hissed open, and the team stepped onto the surface of Zitskari Prime. The heat hit them immediately, but it was the silence that was most jarring. No sounds of life, no distant hum of machinery. It was as if the planet had been abandoned, left to rot in the shadows of its own hubris. "Where are the locals?" Valen asked, scanning the horizon. "I expected more activity." "They're hiding," Holt muttered. "Or worse, they're already gone." They moved forward, following the coordinates they had been given. As they navigated the broken landscape, the crew passed colossal structures that seemed to loom over them, their surfaces battered by time and the elements. Massive factories, once the heart of Zitskari industry, were now silent. Darkened windows, and rusted doors the only indication of their former purpose. The air smelled of burnt metal and ozone, and the ground beneath their feet felt soft, as if it was slowly eroding under the weight of centuries of neglect. The team reached the entrance to a massive underground complex. It was one of the last, remaining research facilities dedicated to studying the blight, and according to the Zitskari officer, it was the epicenter of the plague. As Holt stepped forward, his boot clanged against the metal door, sending an eerie echo through the otherwise quiet expanse. "Should we expect resistance?" Dax asked, his hand instinctively resting on his weapon. "Not from the Zitskari," Holt replied. "They're too weak. But we don't know what the blight can do. Stay on your toes." The door to the complex groaned as it opened, revealing a vast, cavernous room beyond. The walls were lined with glowing panels, each one flickering with sporadic bursts of light. The air inside was thick, charged with a faint electrical hum, as though the entire facility was on the verge of collapse. The team spread out, their weapons raised, scanning every corner for signs of life, or whatever else might be lurking in the shadows. As they moved deeper into the complex, the true horror of the blight became apparent. The walls were covered in strange, pulsating growths, thick veins of blackened tissue that seemed to ripple and shift beneath the surface. It was like the building itself had become infected, consumed by the plague. A low, guttural noise echoed through the corridors, sending a chill down Holt's spine. It sounded like something was moving in the distance, but there was no visual sign of anything, or anyone. "Keep moving," Holt ordered, trying to push the growing unease to the back of his mind. He couldn't afford to let fear dictate his actions. There was too much at stake. They continued down the dark corridors, the flickering lights casting strange shadows on the walls. Then, suddenly, they reached a large chamber, one that appeared to be a research lab of some kind. The room was filled with medical equipment, computer terminals, and holoprojectors, but it was the bodies that caught their attention. Several Scari scientists lay motionless on the floor, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions, their skin pale and sickly. It was clear that the blight had claimed them as well. The disease seemed to ravage every living thing it touched, infecting its victims with terrifying efficiency. "This is where it started," Valen said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is what's left of their research." Holt knelt down beside one of the fallen Scari, his eyes scanning the body for signs of the blight's effects. The skin was discolored, mottled with patches of blackened tissue, and the eyes, once sharp and intelligent, were now dull and lifeless, devoid of any sign of consciousness. It was as if the plague consumed not only their bodies, but their very souls. "What are they trying to do?" Dax asked, his voice shaking with a mix of disgust and fear. "Is this how it spreads?" "Possibly," Holt said, rising to his feet. "This facility may have been trying to find a cure, but they failed. The blight adapted faster than they could keep up." Just then, a low rumble shook the building, sending tremors through the floor beneath their feet. The lights flickered, and the screens around them blinked to life. A holographic projection sprang into existence in front of them, displaying data on the blight, its spread, its mutations, and most disturbingly, its ability to evolve at an alarming rate. "This is bad," Holt muttered, his mind racing. The data confirmed his worst fears. The blight was not only deadly, but it was also a sentient organism, capable of learning, adapting, and evolving in response to any form of treatment. It was as though they were dealing with a living weapon, one that was unstoppable, constantly changing and growing stronger with every passing moment. "We need to get back to the ship," Holt said urgently. "We need to warn the crew. If we don't contain this, the blight could spread beyond Zixkari Prime. And if that happens..." His voice trailed off as the full weight of the situation sank in. Humanity's involvement in this crisis had only just begun. The Zixkari had called for help, but they had no idea what they were truly asking for. Could humanity survive a threat, like the blight? Or would they be just as helpless as the Zixkari? And worse, what if the blight had already found a way to adapt to human biology? Before he could voice his thoughts, a scream echoed from the corridor ahead, a scream that froze the blood in Holt's veins. The scream echoed once more, a high-pitched, blood-curdling sound that reverberated through the walls of the facility. It wasn't the kind of scream a person would make. It wasn't a cry of fear or pain. It was something more primal, something that sent an icy shiver down Holt's spine. This was the sound of an organism in its death throes, or worse, an entity on the cusp of transforming into something far more terrifying. Holt's hand shot to his weapon, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. His heart was pounding in his chest, each beat a reminder of how little time they had before the blight fully revealed its true nature. He motioned to his crew to follow him, and without a word, they advanced down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm, each step laden with the weight of impending doom. They reached the source of the scream within moments, rounding the corner to find one of their own, a soldier by the name of Kessler, fighting for control of his body. His face was contorted in agony as his skin began to shift, twisting and bubbling under the force of the blight. His eyes were wide with terror, his hands clawing at his chest as though trying to rip something free from inside. "Hold on, Kessler!" Holt shouted, rushing to his side. But Kessler's transformation was swift. The blackened veins that had marred the bodies of the Ziskari scientists were now spreading across his skin, eating through flesh like fire through dry tinder. His voice, once human, was now little more than a guttural growl as his mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth where once there had been none. His body convulsed violently, and in one final, horrifying moment, Kessler's body collapsed into a heap of squirming fleshy tendrils, his human form gone entirely. Holt stood frozen for a brief moment, his mind racing. What had just happened? The blight had transformed Kessler into something else. Something monstrous. The Ziskari officers' warnings about the disease were no longer theoretical. They were real. The blight wasn't just a deadly pathogen. It was a force of nature, capable of overriding biology and reshaping its victims into grotesque, alien forms in mere seconds. "Move! Now!" Holt barked, snapping out of his stupor. The remaining crew members didn't hesitate. They sprinted down the corridor, adrenaline pumping through their veins, their eyes darting back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. The building seemed to be alive, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm, the hum of its dying systems now blending with the low growls and shrieks echoing from the deeper chambers. They had to reach the surface. They had to get back to the USS Omen before the blight could spread beyond the walls of this facility. But the moment they turned a corner, they were met with a sight that froze them in their tracks. A massive creature stood before them, its form unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a grotesque blend of Ziskari and something far more sinister, its body covered in writhing black tendrils that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Its eyes, glowing with an unnatural, sickly yellow hue, locked onto the team with a chilling, intelligent gaze. It was the very thing that had screamed earlier. What had once been a Ziskari soldier now twisted into something unrecognizable by the blight. "Damn it," Holt hissed. He had seen monstrous creatures before. Things that could tear through a man with a single swipe. But this was different. This thing wasn't just a monster. It was a threat, intelligent and dangerous, a creature born from a plague that had evolved far beyond anything humanity had ever faced. The creature let out another roar, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth as it lunged toward them. It was faster than anything Holt had anticipated, but he was ready. He raised his weapon and fired, the blast striking the creature's side with a deafening explosion. But to his horror, the blast didn't slow it down. The blight had made this creature more than just resilient. It had made it nearly impervious to conventional weapons. "Fall back!" Holt yelled, his voice rising in urgency. "We need to get to the ship now!" The crew began to retreat, but the creature was relentless, its limbs moving with horrifying precision as it pursued them down the corridor. Each step it took was a nightmare made real. Its tendrils thrashing wildly, its body pulsating with malignant energy. The team's weapons continued to fire, but it was as if the creature didn't even feel the pain. It was a machine of destruction, its sole purpose to eradicate anything in its path. As they rounded another corner, Holt caught a glimpse of something ahead. A light. A faint glimmer in the distance. It was the exit, the airlock that would lead them back to the USS Omen. But they weren't going to make it there in time, not with the creature on their tail, not with the blight transforming everything it touched into its own army of mindless, deadly soldiers. "Hold the line," Holt ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. He knew what needed to be done. They had to slow the creature down long enough for the rest of the crew to escape. He glanced at his team, his mind racing. They were outgunned, outmatched, but they had one advantage: humanity's tenacity. The creature was nearly upon them when Holt fired one last shot, directly at the ceiling. The blast detonated, sending debris raining down onto the corridor, collapsing the tunnel behind them. For a moment, the creature hesitated, giving them the precious seconds they needed to make their escape. "Go!" Holt shouted, shoving his crew forward. "Now!" With the creature momentarily halted, they sprinted toward the airlock, their hearts pounding in their chests, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature wasn't far behind, but the crew managed to reach the airlock, slamming the door shut just in time. "We're not out of the woods yet," Holt muttered as he keyed in the launch sequence. The USS Omen slowly lifted off the ground, the planet's surface shrinking away beneath them. The Blight had only just begun, and Holt knew that their fight was far from over. They had escaped Ziskari Prime, but they hadn't escaped the true nightmare. The Blight had spread to their ship, and once it adapted to humanity's biology, it would be unstoppable. "Set course for Earth," Holt ordered, his voice grim. "It's time we bring this fight to our home." The USS Omen cut through the void of space, its sleek form gliding steadily toward Earth. Holt stood at the bridge, his hands gripped tightly around the command console, his mind swirling with the horrors they had witnessed. The crew, though battered and exhausted, maintained their composure. But Holt knew they were all thinking the same thing. The Blight had come to Earth, and with it, death was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. He had seen it with his own eyes. The twisted, monstrous forms the Blight had created. The way it tore through Ziskari biology like a virus ravaging its host. The Ziskari had called for help, begging the human race to come and save them, to remove the disease before it eradicated everything they had worked to build. But they had never expected the answer they had received. Deathworlders. Holt's mind flashed back to the initial discovery, the flickering transmissions that had reached them from the edge of Ziskari space. The desperate pleas for help. They had thought they were saving lives. They had thought the Blight was just a plague. They hadn't known that it was far more than that it was an agent of war, designed to evolve and adapt at breakneck speed. The Ziskari had underestimated it, and they had certainly underestimated humanity. But it wasn't just a matter of survival anymore, it was a matter of destruction. As the USS Omen neared Earth's orbit, Holt knew there was no turning back. The Blight had already made its presence known on the ship. Even now, he could feel its subtle, creeping presence in the air. The systems, once perfectly operational, had begun to malfunction in ways that couldn't be explained by normal wear and tear. The USS Omen wasn't just carrying a crew, it was carrying a ticking time bomb. "Captain, we're approaching Earth," Lieutenant Kessler reported, his voice tight with tension. The same Kessler who had barely escaped the horrors of the Ziskari facility. The same Kessler whose voice had once been steady and strong. Now, it was barely a whisper. Every word weighed, down by the uncertainty of what awaited them. "Bring us into low orbit," Holt replied, his voice cold, measured. "We need to see if Earth's defenses are ready. But be prepared for anything." They had no idea what they would encounter. Earth was a planet teeming with life, with cities bustling in harmony. At least that's how it had been. They had no idea how quickly the Blight could spread, how far it could go. But one thing was certain. The humans of Earth weren't prepared for a war like this. They weren't prepared for something so insidious, so adaptive. The Blight would not care about borders or treaties or rules of war. It would spread, it would evolve, and it would destroy. The USS Omen descended through Earth's atmosphere, the ship's hull creaking under the stress of re-entry. Below, the cities sprawled in their chaotic beauty. A world full of life, full of dreams. Yet now, a world on the brink of destruction. Holt's gaze drifted over the familiar landscapes of Earth, but his thoughts were far from home. They had come to save a planet they didn't fully understand. And yet, despite all their technological marvels, all their weapons, there was nothing that could prepare them for the horror the Blight would unleash. "Captain," Lieutenant Kessler spoke again, his tone different now. "I'm reading anomalies in the city's grid. Power surges. Uncontrolled signals." Holt's heart skipped. A beat. The Blight wasn't just a biological threat. It was intelligent. It had adapted, it had learned, and now it was spreading through Earth's infrastructure like wildfire. This wasn't just about a plague anymore. It was a new war. One fought on a level humanity had never experienced. The Blight wasn't just something that could be cured or defeated by force. It was a virus of thought. A new evolutionary paradigm that could override entire civilizations. It was a war for the future of every living organism in the galaxy. "Patch me through to Earth's military command," Holt ordered, his voice low and urgent. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than anyone had anticipated. They We're walking into a battlefield where the enemy wasn't just an invader. They were already inside, already embedded within the fabric of human civilization. A crackling, distorted voice filled the bridge's communication system. "This is... General Markham, identify yourself." "This is Captain Holt of the USS Omen," Holt replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising tide of anxiety. "We're coming in hot. We've encountered an alien threat, the Blight. It's already on Earth. You need to prepare for an invasion unlike anything you've ever seen." There was a long pause. For a moment, Holt thought the transmission had cut out. Then, General Markham's voice came through again, its tone surprisingly calm. "Understood, Captain. We've been monitoring strange activity on the surface. We're preparing as best we can, but you need to get here fast. We're going to need everything you've got." "Everything they had?" Holt's hand tightened on the command console as the weight of the situation settled over him. They had no idea what kind of force they were up against. The Blight was more than a simple pathogen. It was a living weapon, an intelligent, adaptive life form that would evolve to counter anything humanity could throw at it. There would be no airstrikes, no missiles, no conventional warfare that would... "Stop it!" And then the transmission cut out. "Damn it," Holt muttered, standing tall. "Prepare for an immediate landing. We're going in. Whatever happens next, we're going to face it head-on." The USS Omen descended into Earth's atmosphere. Once more, its trajectory set for the heart of the largest city, where Earth's last defense had been mustered. They would face the Blight on its home turf, where it was no longer an alien anomaly. It was a force of nature, driven by its own twisted evolutionary logic. Holt stared ahead, a steely resolve in his eyes. They were about to take the fight to the enemy in ways no one had ever imagined. And no matter how it turned out, humanity had already learned one lesson from the Shikari. The price of survival in the galaxy wasn't just a matter of fighting back. It was a matter of what you were willing to become. As the USS Omen landed on Earth's surface, Holt knew that this war was far from over. But they were ready. Humanity had responded, and the Blight had no idea what it was up against.